the next slide, please. And I'm sorry, to confirm, we are recording, correct, Amelia?
I believe we are recording.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so our first matter of order is adopting meeting minutes from our July meeting. Do I have a motion to adopt our meeting minutes from our July meeting?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the minutes from our July 28th, 2021 meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second, Shanita.
Thank you, Shanita. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the minutes have been approved. And next is approving the agenda for tonight's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, the agenda for today's meeting is approved, and we are going to start with public comment. Can you go to the next slide, Elisa? Elisa, do we lose you? See that she's presenting, but thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. Due to the health situation our community is currently experiencing, the September 29th, 2021 Racial Equity Committee meeting will take place via teleconference. Should anyone wish to provide public comment, please send an email that includes your full name to fcpsracialequity@fcps.org prior to the start of the meeting. The Racial Equity Committee welcomes and encourages public comment. Public comments will be read for up to 30 minutes. However, all public comment, whether read or not, will be posted on board docs within 24 hours of the meeting. Please note that public comment is not for statements, and questions will be directed to the appropriate staff for response. Sorry, I'm having technical issues. I pulled them up, but now it disappeared. I'm sorry, bear with me for 1 minute.
Keisha, let me know if I can do anything to help.
Yeah, no, I just had to I'd opened them, but my computer crashed for a second, so I just have to, I'm on it, thank you. Hopefully, or I might just grab it from my phone. That might be the better thing to do. Okay, the first public comment. I am the parent of 3 young children who currently attend FCPS Elementary School. I've been waiting for FCPS to make a move towards teaching critical race theory ideologies, e.g., quote, racial equity, unquote, education. And I'm now highly concerned and on high alert. Racial equity essentially teaches racism. My children are white and are certainly not privileged. Blacks are not oppressed in this day and age, and Black children should not be taught that they are. This program will create division and hate among the new generation. How can you do this with a clear conscience? I will do all that I can to prevent my children from learning CRT. We are all one, and I will not let my children be taught otherwise. I strongly oppose racial equity being taught in our schools, as does my husband. Do not further divide people in this country. This will not be the last you hear from me, a truly concerned and angry parent. CRT is disturbing and racist. Do not teach it at our schools. Sincerely, Allison M. Martin. Second comment. I would like to suggest that for elementary schools, there is an enrollment assessment developed with the curriculum office where a student can complete it in less than 20 minutes so that it provides information for placement. This would be an especially valuable tool for students coming in from another school district. My suggestion is based on the following experience this year. I had a student placed in my room solely based on her Hispanic name. She came from Montgomery County, and even though she did not receive any EL services, I do not have many EL students. While this student is way above grade level and should have been placed in our current advanced academic classrooms that we have in the grade level as part of the new FCPS campaign to replace the gifted and talented programs. Had she had the chance to complete a short 5-question paper addressing her math, comprehension, and writing skills, it would have been obvious to the math and reading specialist what her placement should have been. I can even create a sample of what I am suggesting should you need more information or clarification. This is especially important when we are enrolling students to which we have no data. I wonder how much profiling and bias we are doing in classroom placements when we place students with no data and no placement tools. This tool I am suggesting would allow us to be more objective regardless of name, color, or assumptions of the student and family. Thank you, Rachel Schwartz Sorensen, 3rd grade teacher, Tuscarora Elementary School. And our final public comment, 1 second. Good afternoon. My only comment for the committee is this meeting and topic being presented should be in an in-person meeting and not through teleconference. The subject of critical race theory is too dense and multi-layered of a topic that cannot be expressed very well through the method of teleconferencing. I hope in the future, when tough, intense topics or ideas come up in the committee, the format changes to in-person. Thank you, Ronnie Beard. Okay, and those are our public comments for this evening. Can you go to the next slide, Elisa? Okay, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bass for board member comments.
Okay, everyone, just can you confirm you can hear me?
There's a lot of background noise, David, so it's hard to hear you.
Oh. Is this a little better? Maybe?
I'm hearing, yeah, it's still loud in the background. I can hear you a little bit better, but I'm seeing some head shakes from others.
Oh man, but I was going with just a quick sound check, thinking it would be just fine. Keisha,
we can hear you. There's background noise, but we can hear you now.
I'm going to start, but if it gets worse, yes, please let Keisha, please let me know. I wanted to review 6 of the policies with you that we've looked at, both at policy committee and at Board of Ed in the last meeting on September 22nd. And in some cases, these policies took recommendations from the Racial Equity Committee into the new text. And so at our board meeting on September 22nd, there were 4 policies that we had the first.
David, can you just try to get a little closer because you're kind of coming in and out. If you can get a little closer to the mic, I think that might help.
Okay, we'll try this, hopefully. So we looked at. We looked at personnel policy, negotiations policy, student discipline, and extracurricular policies. And I really wanted to emphasize that in some of the new language in our student discipline policy, that we're using more positive language around some of the conduct that we are looking for students to exhibit. And so statements like, well, you know what? I will click closed captions. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And look at that, it is working. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion. Okay, good. Right, we have statements like describe the conduct that will lead to positive student outcomes and experiences. And so some of that positive language within the student discipline policy, using language around restorative practices. And so that is new. Or some of that language is new to our student discipline policy. And then with the extracurricular policy, I wanted to emphasize that we have a new section within this policy, Policy 509. And part of that states that any behavior that is deemed derogatory may bring consequences ranging from diminished playing time to dismissal from the team. And so I know that, are you, okay, I'm sorry. So I'm gonna just check, Keisha, Elisa, and others.
I think everyone has to individually do it. I'm not sure if Elisa does it, because if she's screen sharing, if people will see. But if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's like a circle that has a CC, and if you click it, you should be able to see the closed caption.
I see it now. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. So certainly it was important, I think, to many of us involved in the Racial Equity Committee to have language around some of these consequences if there were derogatory language or behavior used. And so it's important to me that is in this revised extracurricular and co-curricular policy. Elisa, I think you had raised your hand. And so then at the, okay, Keisha, can I pause here? And I honestly don't know if I have a second laptop somewhere, but I will look. And I'd like to pause my report, and hopefully I have a second laptop.
Okay, we can move on to the next agenda item and then come back to you after that. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa just to go over this slide to remind everyone of our protocol for courageous conversations.
Yep, just really quickly, our quick protocols. Remember to stay engaged, speak your truth, experience discomfort. It's totally okay to experience that. Expect and accept non-closure. And just remember that everyone enters conversations about race at a different part of their compass. And it's just important that we recognize when we're feeling strong toward one point in our compass or another, to remember to center ourselves and come back to the middle. And Keisha, I did just try to share with closed captioning on while David was presenting. It didn't work on my end. So yeah. I think Ivania is right that we each have to click on closed caption on our own for each of us to see it. So sorry, I tried. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide? And next, I want to welcome Dr. Keith Harris and Colleen Bernard, who are going to be giving a presentation on critical race theory and equity education. And I'm not sure if you guys have a slide deck that you'll be sharing at this point, or if you guys are going to just be verbally giving your presentation.
Yeah, we'd love to share a slide deck. So
perfect. Yeah, I think Elisa just unshared, so you can now share your
yours.
Screen. All right, thanks, Elisa. All right. So let me find what I need here.
And just so I don't forget later, we can you make sure to send that to me and Dawn at least, so that she can be sure to post this, or send this to be posted on Board Docs after the meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. As you all know, I'm a member also of the Racial Equity Committee. However, also am Executive Director of the Department of Accelerating Achievement and Equity. So I'm Keith Harris. And with me this evening is Colleen Bernard, Curriculum Specialist for Secondary Social Studies. Now, one of my responsibilities in FCPS is dealing with the work of equity and cultural proficiency. And as many of you know, Dr. Eric Loris-Phillip was the previous supervisor focusing on the work of equity in my department. However, he's since transitioned to another role within the organization. But having said this, whenever Eric did any work for the public or for large audiences on topics associated with, let me see here, I need to, you all can't see the, is that better? I can't see anybody.
I guess when you start the presentation, if you can do like slideshow mode.
Okay.
Yeah. That might help.
So what are you all seeing now?
We see the slides, but it's maybe, yeah, so.
All right. Do you see notes and all of that stuff as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Bottom right-hand corner, Dr. Harris, there's a pull-down slide. It looks like a screen. If you click on that, it should go to preset mode.
Okay, let's see here. Bottom right hand screen. Not seeing it. So let me see here. Nope.
Yeah, and you can also go at the top and click the from beginning at the top left on the bar, and that should do it as well.
Okay. All right. Let me see here.
Right above the first slide. On the
Okay. Display settings, duplicate slide. No. Nope, that's not working either. All right. Then let me share another one then, just so we can see and not be distracted by all the other slides. Let me pull this up. And here we go. Thanks for your patience. There we go. Okay. All right, now. All right, let's try it again. Window. Does that work? All right.
It does, and you might, if you can, click the present on the upper right-hand side. It'll get perfect.
So that should work.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so as I was saying, whenever we do this type of work, usually is done in collaboration as a team. And so even with Dr. Loris-Phillips, when he was in the role, anytime we did any public types of presentations or anything, we usually did those things jointly and collaboratively. And oftentimes we would include Colleen Bernard in the work as well. And so we're grateful that Colleen, thank you so much for joining us this evening to share in this presentation. Now, thank you, Lisa, for sharing our norms from Courageous Conversations with Glenn Singleton. But before we begin, I'd like to add some additional ones for us to consider, because whenever we present on topics that may be a little bit more controversial, we just sort of have some additional norms that we add there. So just want you to take a look at these norms as well as consider the ones that were shared earlier. All right. Moving on. So I was met with the executive committee, and the executive committee asked that we do a brief presentation on critical race theory. Now, just to be clear, I think the last meeting and definitely this meeting, there may have been a few comments relative to this, but in FCPS, we've not had overwhelming criticism or comments or anything like that regarding critical race theory. But as a committee from our last meeting, several of you indicated that you've been hearing about critical race theory all over the nation. There's been other school systems that's been dealing with it. And so you just wanted to know a little bit more information about what is this thing called critical race theory. And there were 3 specific questions that the executive committee wanted us to address this evening. First, you want to know, what is critical race theory? What is it and what is it not? Secondly, is critical race theory within the FCPS curriculum? And thirdly, what practices, if any, align with critical race theory in FCPS? Now, as we go through the presentation, these are the 3 questions that we'll be focused on this evening. And what I would ask is that you would just jot your own notes, and if you have any questions, just go ahead and jot those questions down. And at the end of the presentation this evening, we'll be able to address those questions relative to these 3 focus areas. Also want to keep in mind our norms, as was shared by both Elisa and myself, that this discussion may be unfinished tonight. There may be questions that Colleen and I are not prepared to address, or we may just run out of time as we are presenting. So just also wanted to share that piece as well. Now, so the first question that we want to address is, what is critical race theory? And as I begin to talk about what is critical race theory, the first thing that I'd like for us to do is just take a step back and dissect each of the components of critical race theory that will help us to build an understanding and a definition of what we mean by the term. So let's go ahead and build the understanding. First of all, let's talk about what we mean by theory. So when we think about a theory, we're talking about how we intentionally interact with the world. And a theory is used to explain a phenomenon, or it's used to explain occurrences of why things happen. And so when we think about a researcher or a scholar, when they take a look at studies or they do research on a variety of different facts and a variety of different topics on a particular subject, what will emerge are themes. Now, multiple themes that emerge from studies and that emerge from research will provide broader insights into the existence or the occurrence of a particular phenomenon. And so what theories really do is to explain the recurrence of a particular phenomena that's happening, something that is currently occurring over and over again in society or in the world. That's what themes emerge from various theories. And so theories are developed and used to explain the recurrence of a particular set of things that happens over and over again, or that is pervasive and that sort of exists. One of the things that I want to let you know is that with theories, theories continually evolve. And so, you know, the way I sort of describe it is, originally a researcher or those who are studying a particular topic or subject will look into research, and they will start to emerge some different things that are occurring over and over and over again in the research and in the studies that they are examining. But when I say that theories emerge, it's sort of like, like right now, the recipe, the foundation for a recipe that I use in my house was received from me from my grandmother. And that same recipe was handed down from generation to generation. But with each generation, even though the basic ingredients are the same, I may add a pinch of this, I may add a little bit more of that, just to suit the need at that time or the flavor that I want. And so it's the similar with theories. With theories, even though there are foundational principles that may exist within research or within studies, what may happen over time is that a researcher or a scholar may look at a different aspect of that foundational research. So that's what I mean by theories emerging. It's used to explain a particular occurrence of why or what is happening over the course of time. That's a theory. Now let's talk about a critical theory. So when we think about a critical theory, as you see here, it is a social theory that works to change society by uncovering power structures that benefit some and marginalizes others. So basically what a critical theory does is to take a very specific and focused lens into theory to see how that particular occurrence or that particular lens is impacted by something that's happening in society or in the world in which we live. So that is theory. With theory, you're taking a look at research in general on a particular topic. You're seeing what emerges. With critical theory, I'm now going to take a look at that research and I'm going to focus in looking at it from a particular perspective. That's what critical theory is. Now, I do want you to know and understand that it's important to know that there are a lot of critical theories that have evolved over the course of the 20th century, as well as throughout today. And so some of these theories include, but are not limited to, feminist critical theory. There is queer critical theory. There is indigenous critical theory. There is linguistic critical theory. And there is critical race theory. And so there are a lot of different critical theories that has been studied or that's evolved over the course of time. And we'll talk a little bit more about the sort of history of this as we go forward. So now that we understand theory, now that we understand critical theory, taking a very focused lens into a particular body of research and studies, now we can understand, and I already shared that there are a variety of critical theories. Now we can understand critical race theory. Now, with critical race theory, as you see here on the screen, it critiques how the social construction of a particular lens, in this case, it is race and institutional racism, and how that perpetuates a racial caste system that relegates people of color to the bottom tiers in society. Another definition, it's a review of research to determine themes that emerge, to examine bias and prejudice in legal systems, and as well as in policies. And so that's critical race theory. And so I put just a couple of different samples up here about critical race theory, because while I said before that theories emerge over time, The same thing with critical race theory. It cannot be confined to one single definition. Scholars have used a lot of different theoretical lens. The lens have been reshaped by research that's occurred over and over again. And so we just provide these two definitions tonight just to see how critical race theory is shaped by the lens of the author, given the particular view that they are taking a look at. So, Colleen, let's talk about the evolution of critical theories.
Okay. First, thank you for having me this evening. I'm going to let us dip our toes into the historical context, which is always important when we're talking about anything, and especially when we're talking about the evolution of theories. So critical theories originated in the first half of the 20th century, particularly the 20s, 30s, and 40s. They evolved as scholars looked for paradigms to critique the world in which they lived. Critical theories evolved as critical theories actually evolved in Europe at a time that marked the rise of authoritarianism. So as scholars were looking at this rise of authoritarianism, they were trying to figure out why this was occurring and how this was happening. Critical theory was developed to challenge the social, political, and economic status quo, providing a lens for critiquing and questioning the institutions and policies that were in practice at the time, uncovering, and historically in practice, uncovering power structures within both that led to inequities and promoting freedom from oppression. In the 1960s and especially into the 1970s, that's when we see the variety of schools that Dr. Harris referenced earlier rising from critical theory. Feminism is probably, the feminist school is probably the one that is best known, but there are numerous branches of critical theory. In the 1970s, one of those branches was critical legal studies, which is a movement which critical race theory evolved from. And critical legal studies posits that the law is not objective or apolitical, that the law could be complicit in perpetuating inequities. Critical race theorists worked to center race in these discussions of the apolitical nature of law, embracing the view that law was not colorblind and not politically neutral. The critical race theorists question how racism remained in society even when the law was supposed to protect against it. By 1989, a group of scholars are going to convene at a conference in Wisconsin. Kimberly Crenshaw, being one of the founders, theoretical founders of critical race theory, is at this conference with a number of other scholars. And from this conference comes the School of Critical Race Theory. Now, when we look at the body of research and how theories evolve over time, through these descriptions, there are some basic tenets of the theory that, although they vary across these bodies of scholarly work, there are some themes that emerge in discerning the theory's founding concepts. So the first is that race is socially constructed and not biologically dictated. That race, so society determines what race is and what race isn't. Racism is the norm in societal institutions, systems, and policies. It's not the aberrant behaviors of individuals. Like going back to that definition of critical theory, where we're looking at a macro view of society. So we're looking at society as institutions and systems and policies. We're not looking at the practices of individuals within that society. It's not the purpose of this theory. That in this theory, storytelling and the lived experiences of people are valued as part of the theory, especially people of historically marginalized groups. That there's a commitment to working for change and social justice, and that each person has intersecting identities, that each of us doesn't hold one single identity. That these intersecting identities could include race, gender, economic status, ethnicity, religion, many others. Again, it's important to notice Dr. Harris mentioned earlier, theories continually evolve, growing and changing with the scholarly research. So let's now talk just a little bit about what critical race theory is and isn't. And again, this is, we're really trying to take something that's very, very, very complex and boil it down in a manner that we can all understand. So what it is a theory. It's a way to examine laws and systems from the lens of race, and it's used in scholarly research. What it isn't is it's not a curriculum. It's not about individual actions, and it's not about specific practices. It's a theoretical framework. Now, the second question the Racial Equity Committee asked was whether or not there are aspects of critical race theory in the FCPS curriculum. Critical race theory is not a framework that we have adopted in FCPS for our curriculum. Our curriculum is aligned with state standards and frameworks, not individual theories. Speaking specifically to the secondary social studies curriculum that I'm the specialist for, we value the historical record through the use of primary and secondary sources, discerning their credibility and corroborative value in order to construct arguments and understandings based on reasoned judgments or evidence, and diversifying materials to provide multiple perspectives. We analyze society's institutions and laws and their implications on rights and responsibilities. We study history by presenting facts and promoting the use of critical thinking skills to discern one's own perspective. We teach the good, the bad, and the ugly of history. That's our job as historians and social scientists. We teach about racism as it evolved within the context of world and American history. We study the past to inform our present as we interrogate the historical record and current events. And we delve more deeply into discipline-specific analysis of race and racism in some of our high school elective courses, such as sociology. What we do not do is tell students what to think. We present material from multiple perspectives. We do not promote one political, social, or economic ideology over another. Using one theory alone to inform practice is concerning due to the purpose of theories in explaining particular phenomena. A sole theory is too myopic to explain the complexity and diversity of the world in which we live today. Dr. Harris, I'll leave the next question up to you to answer.
Thanks, Colleen. So the third question that we wanted to address that the committee asked is, are there practices that are informed by critical race theory? Our practices in FCPS are informed through an equity lens, not a critical race theory lens. So one of the things that we have to understand and that we have known for decades about inequities in educational access for students is especially students from marginalized groups. We've known that gaps have existed. We've known that there's been inequities that's existed in educational systems. We didn't need a critical theory to tell us that these disparities existed. They were and are evident in society and in the data that we collect about student achievement. Furthermore, as we think about this, national legislation such as No Child Left Behind, Every Student Succeeds Act, they mandate the types of data we collect. But again, as educators, and Colleen sort of reinforced this, it's our responsibility to continually evaluate data, whether we are mandated to do so or not. And that's what we do. Regardless of any theory, we're going to examine disparities that exist across our school system, and we're going to examine disparities in access, whether it be disparities in access to rigorous coursework, attendance data, discipline data, achievement data. Whatever the data is, there's no one theory that explains the disparities, or no one theory provides a solution. And so I'm saying all this to say, whether critical theories existed or not, we still would, and we do, examine disparities so that we can provide appropriate education for each and every student in our school system. And so as the educational system and societies have evolved, we've been provided with some new opportunities to examine gaps for students. And so the examination of these gaps in the development of practices to remove barriers to learning, that's not critical theory. That's the practice of being an educator. And so when we're looking at removing barriers, we're not consulting theories. We're looking at data. We're looking at research. Our decisions to examine gender disparities in access to coursework, our examination of the needs of students with disabilities, our examination of our Black African American students, or whatever the student group, our examination of achievement data to see who is accessing, who is not, who is passing academic criteria or not, who's accessing rigor or not. That's not dependent upon a theory telling us to do so or how to do it. We examine all of our the achievement of all of our students, and so our practices are informed by research. And yes, our research often has a theoretical lens, but the theory doesn't dictate the actions. The findings of the research, along with the law and our commitment to a quality education for each and every student, guides our practices in FCPS. And so I said before that our practices are informed through an equity lens, not a critical race theory lens. And so this shares what we mean by educational equity. Our focus in FCPS is not a lens on one indicator or value that a student may possess. Our concern is making sure that we value the unique identifiers of every student, regardless of ability, age, ethnicity, family structure, gender expression, identity, language, nationality, national origin, race, and the list goes on and on. We take a look and we examine data to make sure that there is access to resources, access to rigor at the right moment based upon each individual student's needs. And we respond by providing the support that each student needs personally so that they can achieve their greatest and that there are no barriers or obstacles for them accessing educational opportunities. This is the focus and the lens by which we operate in FCPS. Not only because that's our responsibility, we feel as educators in FCPS, but then also our Board of Education also dictates how we go about evaluating the work that we do. As a matter of fact, here is our board policy statement. And so the work that we do in FCPS, it's guided, as Colleen have shared and I've shared, is guided by what we do as educators, not a particular theory, but based upon research and what we know through an examination of research and data on an ongoing basis, what each and every student needs. Also is guided by educational law, FCPS policy, and then also we have a lot of system guidance that guides what we do as well. And so I just wanted to share some of the policies, some of the goals and some of the regulations that guide the work that we do in FCPS. So, having said that, that's a brief presentation on what it is. Again, our intent was not to get deep into the woods, but just specifically address those 3 questions for the purposes of tonight's presentation. So, what questions do you have, if any?
And folks can feel free to go off mute and just ask your question.
I'll try to ask a question. It'll also be a good test of whether my microphone is working. Dr. Harris, Ms. Bernard, can you hear me? Okay. Do you feel that there has been any increase in using race as a lens with which we can look at history in the last few years? Has race increased as a lens with which we can look at history in the last few years as you've worked in your roles?
So I will answer that from a systemic lens, and then Colleen, if you could address that from a social studies lens. So from a systemic leadership lens and examining our data and our processes and how we go about our work in FCPS, race has always been one of many lenses in dynamics that we focus on when we determine whether or not we are progressing or not. And so I would not say that there's been an increase in examining data and practices based on race. I would say it's always been there, because historically we've always seen gaps that existed between some student groups and others, particularly our Black African American students in comparison to their white peers. And so race from that perspective has always been a focus, but it's not stopped there. We've also looked at data and other practices based on other identifying student factors. Colleen, how about from a social studies lens?
All right. From a social studies lens, I've been in this position about 5.5 years now. And during that time, the state has, they have put out 4 new frameworks of our 6 core courses. And that also, those include our 8th grade American Studies 1 course, our 9th grade American Studies 2 course, our 10th grade American Government course, and our 11th grade Modern World History course. All of those frameworks, the intent of which is to provide agency for all students in our classrooms so that every student can see themselves in the curriculum that we teach. Here in FCPS and secondary social studies, we have worked to untether from the single narrative of a textbook and to broaden the narrative to include open educational resources that allow us the opportunity to bring in resources from places like the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in Baltimore, the Stanford History Educational Group, the Library of Congress, the National Archives, Gilder Lehrman. There's a multitude of high quality resources out there that we use in our curriculum maps. Ultimately, it's up to our teachers to determine how they are going to enact standards within their classrooms. And I do want to emphasize that our standards in FCPS align with the state frameworks. And those are publicly available on the FCPS website.
So I have a quick question. This is Elisa. So I actually have two, if it's okay. When you all say that data is collected and it's continued to be collected throughout the years, what exactly does FCPS collect data on in alignment with student demographics? For example, I'm thinking of, do we have data on how many students of color and students within the global majority are enrolled in AP classes? How many of those students are enrolled in dual enrollment? How many of those students are students in the global majority get kicked out of, basketball games, for example, and things like that? Like, does FCPS collect that specific data? I'm certain achievement is collected based upon demographics, but what else does FCPS collect?
So we collect data not only on achievement, but then also perceptual data as well. And the data that we collect systemically aligns with our board's aspirational goals. And so if you go on the FCPS website, under Board of Education, you will see all of our aspirational goals. And then usually what you will see are the specific indicators and then the reporting out of the data relative to those particular indicators. So usually that's what we do. And as staff, we report on that data throughout the year to the Board of Education. So at this last board meeting, we presented on a few of our goals with specific data from that. And so we will present on not only achievement data, we will present on hiring data, we will present on student perceptual data, how they're feeling about their experiences. We present on discipline data, we present on staff data. And so there's a wide range of data that we present on. To take that a little bit further, we have central leadership teams, as well as level-specific leadership teams, as well as school-based leadership teams that all take a look at data, each going from the macro and getting even more specific in the review and analysis of data based upon their particular content or their scope of influence from which they are taking a look at that data, whether from a school level, from a level elementary, middle, or high, or from the whole central level. So yes, we do take a look at a wide range of data.
Okay, I had a question. Okay, it's been helpful to kind of hear about the data, and I know what we're doing in social studies, but we know, like, back to David's thing about sort of using race as a lens to look through. We know, like, the educational system, like the healthcare system, is a system. And so what extent are we sort of like looking at a higher level outside of social studies of how there may be unintentional ways things are set up that may lead to disparities? Like, so for example, like if you have like a word problem in math and it gives an example that may be like familiar to some people, some groups of students, but not others, a kid might get it wrong, not because of a comprehension, but just sort of like the example didn't resonate with them. And so I guess like outside of social studies, like just sort of other things that are being done, looking from in terms of like finding solutions, like sort of how can we use race as a lens to identify things that might be like implicit or unconscious to make improvements in disparities.
So, and Jen, I see you on as well. And so you might want to share a little bit about our accelerated learning processes of how we examine data from those lenses. But in all of our subject areas, we take a look at disparities that exist, whether by race or other factors. And so, yes, in math, yes, in English language arts, as well as in social studies, we're taking a look at who's accessing coursework, who's understanding or not, based upon not just formal assessments, but also informal assessments that occur in the classroom and the school-wide level as well. Jen, I didn't know if you had anything else to share relative to that question.
Yeah, I can just layer on to say we also have a district committee on assessment where we review our assessments, our internal assessments, where we use a rubric, where we look at those assessments to make sure that the purpose is clear, that we do have, different ethnicities incorporated in those so that it would be making sure that each student can be successful. So we try to develop as many practices that we can to have different lenses looking at the curriculum, the assessment, our instructional practices, so that we are ensuring that our students are able to be successful. As far as dashboards and data, we do have dynamic dashboards so that for every piece of data that's available, there's drill in. And that is what we want for each. We want the drill into each and every student. And that's really what it's about, is making sure that we raise achievement for each and every. We talk about eliminating achievement gaps, but it's not just eliminating achievement gaps. It's raising achievement for all students while eliminating the achievement gap. And so it's looking across everything that we do and examining our practices to say, how else can we do better, be better, and reach our students better? And then, like Dr. Harris was talking about, we have accelerated learning process meetings that occur in each school where teacher teams come together. They look at their instructional practices. They look at student work and they examine student work samples, and it's related to the standards to see how is each student performing on that, and then designing their instructional practices based on that data. So the data how the students are performing drives that, and it's individualized because we're monitoring the work of each and every student.
Any other questions?
Okay, I'm sorry. I did have one last one, and then I'm going to completely lean out. Okay. Dr. Harris is like, oh no. So I overheard you all say, I can't remember, Ms. Bernard, if it was you or Dr. Harris, if it was you, but I heard you all say it's important that we do not tell students what to think. How does Frederick County Public Schools as a system differentiate between history and historical events that were clearly the purpose of them was to spread hate or exhibit hate against a certain peoples, and those events that do have multiple perspectives, like clear hateful events, and then those that do have multiple perspectives, in alignment with FCPS's mission of being an equitable environment, and most importantly, noting our students within the global majority and recognizing they're in our classes too. How does Frederick County kind of identify the difference between those types of events? And then I guess I'm concerned but we don't tell them what to think. I don't even know if that was really clear, but
Yeah, so you're expressing there are events that has taken place throughout history, and those events are facts. And given the facts, how do we allow students to make their own assumptions, but without the facts being misrepresented, in essence? Colleen?
I actually saw it in a classroom today doing an observation with a teacher who was teaching about the Tulsa race riots. When we present that information, that's an event. That's a historical event that occurred. The perspective of what actually happened during that event is where we bring in the historical record. We bring in the primary sources and the secondary sources and present that information to our students and ask them to inquire. What really happened here? Was this a race riot or was this a race massacre? Right? And so I'm not, as the teacher, I'm going to facilitate that conversation amongst my students and let them interrogate that historical record to draw their own conclusions, versus I'm going to stand in front of my students and say, it was a race riot or it was a race massacre. You know, we can say the same thing about the Boston Massacre. Was it really a massacre? And we inquire and we interrogate the historical record that way. And we help facilitate that conversation so that students can draw conclusions based on the facts that are presented in class. And the facts, and I'll say, and the facts that they discover themselves. I mean, that's our goal, is for students to really engage in the historical record and in the content, and to dig deep, and to spark their curiosity about this information. So I hope that answered your question.
Dr. Bell.
How are you? I've been sitting here and I've been thinking, and hold on. Hold on one second. Let me just make sure.
We can hear you.
Okay, I've been sitting here and I've been thinking, and throughout, you know, these committee meetings, and just listening to some of the public comments and the visceral responses that I'm hearing from some community members regarding this topic. And I think that what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is why, or what is the opposition to presenting history and teaching children to think and to draw conclusions and to be mindful, to just present the facts and not present it in one way. See, when I was also a history teacher. I was a secondary history teacher. But before I was a history teacher, I was a student of history. History was presented to me from one lens, and it had nothing to do with me. So I actually became a history teacher because of that. That was the reason why I became a history teacher, which was very odd to most of the people who knew me, because I was very uninterested in history as a child. I didn't like the way it was presented. I always felt very slighted. So I like the idea of being very open and honest and having engaging conversations. What I struggle with is why there is so much tension and why there is so much fear, and why you know, we continue to have conversations around the Black people aren't oppressed anymore, or, which is not true, or there is racism doesn't exist anymore, or, because that is not the purpose of thought presenting the facts in history. So I think that part of this work has to be around the educating of the broader community, and not just our internal community, because I think we do a wonderful job in making this a priority in our schools. I am part of that work, and it is very real work. And no matter what you think, it is something that it is a priority. We have those conversations. Now, if the conversations stop at the school and we don't have an evening where we have those conversations in our community, where we're bringing, like, just like we have a parent teacher night, just like we have a back to school night, just like we have a math night, we need to have these types of conversations. And that might be something that is, you know, very far-fetched to some, but at the same time, I feel like the only way to get parents to understand that we're not trying to bring children in the schoolhouse and teach them that their ancestors were these ugly monsters or something, is to help them to understand the thought process, the framework, how we teach, the idea that the purpose is to get students to be able to draw their conclusions based on the evidence, based on being able to have those conversations. And I think that's a really important thing. Point blank, period. And if we don't do that part of the work, there's always going to be a disconnect. And how much of that is our responsibility? Well, we bring our communities in for every other reason. And if we are really serious about having these big conversations and having a global understanding of what it is that we're doing, I would argue that we may need to think about doing that.
Thank you, Camille. Dr. Harris or Colleen, did you guys have anything to say in response to that?
Nothing in response. Camille, that's your certainly your thought and your perspective that I believe you just threw out for the group just to get out, what you are thinking relative to some of the things that you hear. So.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you, Dr. Harris and Colleen, for giving up that presentation today and answering the questions.
Good, thank you. And Colleen, I'm staying, but have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Okay, we're gonna try to move back up to board member comments. David was suggested that possibly if you turn off your video, the quality of your audio might be better. So I don't know if you want to try that and see if, if you called in phone. Yeah. I think your phone might be on mute if you're. We can't hear you.
So I see the mute button on my phone, and I've pressed it to turn it on or off, but that doesn't seem to do it. I don't know if Amelia or someone else is able to unmute my phone. It's the 607 number. Because I did think the phone could work. I guess the best bet might be I'll turn off the video. And I don't know if you can hear me any better with that. Keisha, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I just, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it might be an internet thingy, bandwidth kind of thing. So
we'll go with this for now. To briefly review from before, 6 policies the board looked at on September 22nd, 4 of them at our board meeting. I think the most relevant that I just really wanted to highlight that we did our first reading on, the student discipline policy, which really got some more positive language in there, including around restorative practices. And I think a lot of the language was developed from the Racial Equity Committee. Similarly, I was just really, I think it was very important that in Policy 509, our extracurricular policy, that there is a new paragraph in there which states in part, right, any behavior that is deemed derogatory may bring consequences ranging from diminished playing time to dismissal from the team. And I know that, this is some of the language that was suggested from our extracurricular subcommittee. And so this also went to the board. The second reading, which is usually the final reading, right, that will be at October 13th, and certainly public comments are welcomed for that. Policy Committee also looked at two policies on September 22nd last week, graduation and attendance. And in the attendance case, some of the language adopted was work that the subcommittee I serve on had done, with a real emphasis that any student who's under 21 who does not yet have a high school diploma, that we actively that we highly encourage them to enroll in FCPS. And it was just very important within our subcommittee, and I really emphasized this at our policy committee, right? Someone who's under 21 and doesn't have a high school diploma yet, we have a responsibility to actively encourage that they enroll in FCPS. And so it's important that that language stayed in or got into the policy. And so that attendance policy and a new graduation policy will be went through policy committee. That'll be coming to the board on October 13th. The graduation changes were small and mostly driven by the state, but an additional credit for math and additional credit for health were some of the changes. So those are some policy updates. So certainly it was a busy day in terms of policy on September 22nd. I have more to say in the report. Does anyone have any questions first, though, on the policy side?
Avanya, feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. I just had a question. I'm really happy to see the attendance policy that we advocated for and the under 21 to be pushed forward. So I appreciate that. I'm wondering, I feel like, and I'm just trying to get clarification, at some point, I feel like we looked at policy 444, the commitment to equity, and we were trying to move forward recommendations to add citizenship as one of the dimensions of diversity under the equity policy. Can anybody give me an update of if that was something that we moved forward as a committee or not? I'm again still feeling like we're doing a disservice to not include citizenship as a means of as another dimension of diversity for our students.
I'm glad you raised policy 444, and someone else will correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think we had 3 or even 4 subcommittees looking at the equity policy, and so I believe Keisha and I and perhaps others on the executive committee felt we wanted to get all of that information together first. And so I have not sent recommendations for changes on policy 444 yet, in the hopes that we would, bring all that information together at one time. Keisha, is that also your understanding or remembrance of this?
Yes, and that's correct. And Ivania and we don't want to lose that. We feel like that's a really important policy that we want to move forward. So we don't want to let too much time lapse. So after David's comments, as part of the executive subcommittee, we sort of want to have a discussion about subcommittees that include something related to that. So we definitely don't want to lose it. We want to make sure as a committee that we're sort of sending stuff to the policy committee like comprehensively versus in piecemeal. So that's kind of why we've held that. But I think we definitely want to move quickly on that moving forward. And we'll kind of talk through a couple different ways of doing that after David's done with his comments. But Vanya and Keith, I see you both have your hands up, so feel free to ask your question or respond to that.
You can go ahead, Dr. Harris. I just accidentally pushed it.
Okay, so I was wondering about the citizenship piece, because I know in FCPS, I don't believe we collect data on citizenship. Whoever enrolls, we just enroll them and we teach them regardless of citizenship status. And I know in, policy 444, we do talk about identifiers such as nationality, such as national origin, those things. So, I was just wondering about the citizenship piece, given that that's just not something we include or exclude students because of.
I mean, just in what I'm from my understanding, correct? And I correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't collect information in terms of religion and other identifiers that are listed in the policy as well, correct?
We do consider some systemic decisions based on religion. So, for example, when we take a look at our school system calendar or when meetings are held, those are considering factors.
Well, I mean, in to respond to that, then I think that citizenship is an identifier, whether we collect the data or not, and should be considered as programming and other regulations or whatever occurs within the school system. Citizenship should be just as equal as a consideration as religion and other identifiers of diversity.
I also, Ivania, I appreciate that. And I think I want to be direct in my view, right? That, in my view, that FCPS has a relationship with law enforcement through the school resource officer program. And when I consider that, it is part of why I personally would like to see citizenship status discussed as part of our equity policy. That's my view, and there certainly could be further discussion on that, but that's certainly, that would be the view that I would hold. I want to go over a few more things, if that's okay, outside of policy. I did want to also review that. It's unclear to me how many folks know about this video, but I did want to briefly address that in late August, there was administration at one of our high schools became aware of a video of a Frederick County student threatening violence against Asian Americans. And I think there were some questions on what are the procedures in that case? What happened? And some of what I know and want to share, is that the principal, along with the school resource officer, began an investigative process, right? That there's a school-based process and a law enforcement process, and many, this included reaching out to the parent, ensuring that the video was removed, scheduling a conference with the parent and the student and the school counselor, and in discussing this with Dr. Albin, one thing she noted, which I would not have realized, but in that case, the student was not allowed to return to school until the conference was held. And there was a behavioral threat assessment conducted, and a variety of consequences discussed. And then on the law enforcement side, there's a hate crimes general order that the school resource officer kind of documented or documented the complaint as an official criminal investigation and are reporting the details to the Maryland State Police and the Frederick County Human Rights Commission. So it's a scenario where I understand many folks on our committee would not have seen the video, and it was out in the public. And so I thought it was just important to address this and give some information there. I think similarly, I did want to briefly address as well that you may have seen. In fact, the board did put out a statement earlier this month. That at a girls' volleyball game between Catoctin High School and Frederick High School, there were allegations about really derogatory language being used during the game. And, I think I just want to note with that both schools began an investigation and are working together. And, I've, as a board member, certainly asked that consequences in situations of racism that these consequences are made very clear. But I'm also understanding that there are cases that these consequences, the direct consequences, are not necessarily going to be made public, but that the schools are working through the procedures in this case. I don't know that so I wanted to share both of that. I think I wanted to end my report just simply saying, and I was planning to say this even if my video and my audio and all of this worked just fine. I think I want to end my report by saying I personally would love for us to move toward in-person meetings. I think that there's a cohesiveness in our committee and in our work together that I think we could achieve in sitting in a room together and discussing these issues and seeing each other. And so I may see within our executive committee whether we might be able to send out a poll to once again just see what people's comfort level would be on that. But certainly I think there's ways in which it could help continue the work of our committee. And I guess I just did want to say that that's kind of where I'm at with that. Are there any questions? Any additional questions? I think we'll leave that there then. Thank you, everybody.
If you're talking, you're on mute. It looks like you might be talking.
Sorry, you were asking Elisa whether...
It looks like she was talking, so I just wanted to...
I'm sorry. I was talking to my daughter. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't... Sorry. Any other questions or comments for David? And just to add to David, to your first point, if my dog will stop barking, just for some context for committee members, we did have a community member email the Racial Equity Committee email address with the video, and I think a concern about like sort of what the how it was being handled. And we know a lot of times the sort of answer is that, it's being handled, but we can't really say anything. And so David just wants to sort of provide at a high level, sort of the general things that are done in these cases, because it can be really frustrating to sort of hear about a situation and not have any understanding of if it's being taken seriously, what the consequences are and that kind of stuff. So that's just some of the context for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Lisa, can you present your screen again? Okay, two things for the executive subcommittee update. We just wanted to put out a plug again for the community liaison position. As I mentioned during the last meeting, we're just kind of looking for someone who can kind of keep a pulse on what's going on, whether it be like news articles or happenings such as like things that David brought up just now, or events in the community that might be of interest to committee members, and would just sort of like be able to share those when they become aware of it. Now that kind of the school year has started and things are hopefully settling down some, if there's someone who feels like they have the time and is interested in doing that, we would love to have that position filled, just to make sure we're keeping a pulse on the greater goings on in our community. So feel free to either reach out to me or volunteer, or if you have any other specific questions, to, again, reach out with those questions either now or later so that we can hopefully get that position filled. And the other thing that we wanted to do is that we wanted to sort of have an open discussion about subcommittees and just giving some context. I think we've kind of been reflecting over what our subcommittees have been doing over the past year and a half. There's been some great work. We've had several policy recommendations move forward, and David, presents on that going forward. And we want to make sure to continue to track that. But we have had a couple committee members reach out and just sort of ask kind of what the next steps are. So I think each subcommittee is in a different place depending on what sort of like what policies are relevant to them, what data is available, that sort of thing. And so there's also been concerns about kind of people feeling overwhelmed and some committees having like fewer members than others. And so we sort of wanted to have a discussion of, as the slide that Elisa just brought up shows, but like what's been working well and what we might want to consider, and just sort of like to prime the pump. A couple ideas we were having, and again, want to get everyone's feedback on, just to sort of address the concern of there might be some like committees that are busier than others, some that have work to do and some that don't, as well as what we were talking about before. There may be some issues that are sort of cross-cutting across multiple committees with the way the committees are currently divided up. So definitely wanted to get feedback on, people's perceptions based on their experiences so far of like, would there potentially be value of like doing some restructuring of subcommittees? There may be committees that are doing a really good job in a really important place and need to be maintained the way they are. But there also may be other ways to slice and dice the way we are structuring our subcommittees. And it could be, again, having fewer committees that focus on either more items. And again, the items that are most timely are going to sort of vary over time. So it wouldn't be, all the work, but sort of making sure people have a steady flow of things to work on, as well as potentially committees that are just more, have more of an overarching focus. And so we thought like there may be value in having a committee of folks who are focused on that sort of like the policy 444 and equity, so that we can sort of look at it from all the different lenses and sort of provide a comprehensive recommendation to the policy committee that addresses multiple components of that. So I'm going to pause there for a second, and we really just want to sort of open this up to a discussion around everyone's opinion of like how the subcommittee structure is working thus far, what's working well, and what could be improved upon, so we can sort of think about how to move forward with our subcommittee structure.
Well, I think the subcommittees certainly is a way to chunk the work. The charge that we have as a racial equity committee is huge. And so by serving in committees, it helps us to tackle a huge problem and break it down into manageable chunks so that we can address a broad variety of things, but then at the same time, address them well because we have different people focused on specific things.
I think one of the things that makes it a little difficult is for those of us that are working on smaller subcommittees. Like if our subcommittee only has 3 people, it makes it really hard to do the work sometimes.
We really want to make sure we're hearing from folks. Does everyone think things are kind of good as is? Any suggestions? Camila?
I was going to ask what some of the feedback was that you were hearing. I've only been involved in one subcommittee, and our subcommittee functions quite well. So I don't really have anything to gauge it from.
Okay, no, and that is great. Like, that's what we want to hear. We don't want to change things if it's working well. I think there were just some committees that are kind of have fewer members that have been, so there's been some like feeling, I think, overwhelmed with like getting stuff done. There's been subcommittees who I feel like, and as the exec board, we're kind of trying to work on standardizing a process so that we're making sure we're communicating back to you guys, like when you put a policy forward where things stand. But I think there are some committees who are kind of like, we put something forth and we kind of like don't have anything to do right now until we like hear back, or, something's been done and we're not really sure what we're supposed to do next. And so making sure we're giving guidance that's useful to folks, and making sure that we're kind of managing it so, we don't have some groups that are feeling like super overwhelmed and others that don't have anything to do. So just trying to think about if there are things we can do. But it's, we want to hear about things, like if there are committees where things are going well, and there is like a path moving forward, we don't want to like change things for the sake of changing things. So that's good to hear as well. Mason, do you have something to say?
Sorry, I think she was going to speak first. That's okay with me. All right, I guess I'll just go. So I'm on the School Climate and Discipline Data Committee, and unless I'm like somewhat out of the loop on some kind of communication, I haven't gotten pretty much like anything to do. So like if there's other subcommittees that are like, needing more people, like I would be willing to help with that. Or if there's like, I'm not really sure who like the head of the subcommittee is, but like if they have any kind of like policy goals or policies to like research and stuff, I would be up to do that. I'm just not really sure who to communicate with on stuff like this. So if we had some kind of like better form of like communication other than just like emailing, that'd probably be a little bit more helpful.
Thank you. Ivania?
I agree with Mason. I think I serve on 2 committees, and quite frankly, I'm not really sure where they stand. And so I think it would be helpful to have, maybe like another means of communication other than email. And then I think it's also helpful if we get like, especially after a subcommittee has already done a presentation to the rest of the group, it's also really helpful to maybe get like a recharge or a refocus for the group so that we know what to do after that. So I think a lot of the lag has been like, we present at the general meetings and then it feels like, are we done? I don't know if we're done yet. Is there something else we should be looking at? So I think maybe just like what's next type of a update would be helpful for us to know what to work on, because I'm kind of with Mason. I'm kind of like in limbo. I don't know really where to help.
Angela, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Mason and Ivania both said, that I'm also on a subcommittee, but I haven't gotten any communication about it.
Okay, no, thank you. This has been really helpful. Any other questions or comments?
Just one comment. I think it's great that the various subcommittees are making public comment at board meetings relative to some of the issues. It would be helpful, I'm wondering if the entire committee had access or a heads up to some of those public comments so that we could support the public comment that's being made. So just wanted to share that piece as well. Oftentimes, public comment is made, and I'm not sure if the entire committee is aware of the public comment, or maybe even have been able to provide some sort of input or a lens into some of the comments that are made.
Anything else?
Dr. Harris, do you are you suggesting like that for the public comment, the subcommittee should send it to the entire committee versus just flushing it out within just the subcommittee?
Yeah, when we started, Camille, that's what would happen.
Okay.
Subcommittees may work on something, and then they'd send the public comment out to the entire committee to say, this is a public comment that we're going to make. If you have any comments or feedback, let us know by a certain date or time.
Yeah, and I will say, like, that process works well. I think the past couple, I feel like, have just been sort of like last minute, but I do think it's still worth kind of bringing that back in. We can sort of flag for folks that, as soon as we know that this is happening, just so that individuals do have an opportunity. So I think that's a good point to raise.
Yeah, and I also think,
I was just going to ask one other question. Is there a list with, the names and phone numbers, contact information of people who are on the subcommittees and who is the chair of the subcommittee? That will probably be helpful for folks that say they don't know who to contact.
We can definitely do that. I think there's a list of the people, but I don't think it identifies the lead. So we can, I don't know if I said, so we'll look into that and make sure that we do that moving forward. Elisa, were you getting ready to say something? Yes, we are trying to streamline that process. But all this feedback is really helpful, and I think we can take it back. I think the communication is something that we'll definitely want to make sure that everyone has kind of a linkage, and there's a clear point person for every committee, so that people feel comfortable and know the next step. We're also, like, in addition to streamlining, like knowing what policies are being discussed, we also want to make sure that we have a good process of reporting back, like I said, when you guys make recommendations, where things stand, so people don't feel like they're in limbo, but sort of understand where in the process things are. So this is all really helpful for us to take back and think about as we're kind of moving things forward. So thank you. Any last comments or questions before we move on to the next item?
Keisha, I feel that.
David, can you turn off your video? Because your audio quality was much better. Thank you.
Hopefully the audio is better now.
Yes.
I think that you made some connection to this at the beginning when you brought this chart up, but basically in our executive subcommittee, there was some discussion that made good sense to me, that as we look at larger policies, such as making recommendations on changes for the equity policy, or perhaps an anti-racism policy, for FCPS? Would there be value in our having two large subcommittees and so I don't know if you wanted more. I mean, I think the feedback we've gotten from everybody is excellent and helpful. I don't know. Did you want to ask more specifically about that, or or not? I guess is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of, and I don't think it has to be either or. So, but we did want to sort of think through potentially like having a committee that focused on like, the equity / anti-racism policy, and if there would be interest in sort of serving on a committee that sort of was more overarching and sort of, I'm not sure how that, it seems like we don't want to, and I can tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like, I don't know. It sounds like for some people, the sort of current structure is working well. For some committees, it's not. So trying to figure out exactly what to do with that. And I think, we have to sort of tease out what's happening to figure out exactly what's going on with that. But if people would be willing or interested in serving also on a either also or instead of like on this kind of more specific committee, a more overarching committee that was focused on, I think, right now, sort of the one that comes to mind is sort of one focused on like anti-racism equity that would sort of like be a overarching, holistic recommendation for a policy that really looked at sort of, how equity is being addressed across like everything. So not, like curriculum and teaching and discipline and that kind of thing. So just want to kind of garner interest in that.
Thank you. I even if we don't make final decisions on that tonight, it was an idea that I really liked when I first heard it, and so I just sort of wanted to make sure that it was mentioned in our meeting tonight. Thank you.
Any thoughts or comments about that, or not? People can process it and let us know later, and we'll sort of take that along with the other feedback and try to regroup and figure out ways to continue to streamline and just making sure our subcommittees are functioning as efficiently as possible. Okay, so if there's nothing else related to that, we can move on to the review of subcommittee work. And can I have the representative from the Hiring, Recruitment, Retention, and Professional Development of Staff Subcommittee?
Yep, that'll be me.
Great, thank you.
So just to give you kind of a high level of what we've been working on in our conversations, we were able to connect with an HR representative to really discuss and better understand the current district recruitment process, the strategies for diverse hiring and diverse candidate pools, and professional development training offered for staff. So it was really nice, one, to put a name on the face of the representative that is doing the work, since we've just been looking at policies on paper. So we were very friendly, but we did have like tons of questions, and she was fantastic. By making this connection, we were able to discuss obstacles with the hiring and retaining of certified staff, administrative positions, and support staff, and really get a better understanding of the current HR practices and how these policies are being implemented. So we felt that was a win. We're continuing to analyze and review data that we received from central office in April. So we're not only looking at the hiring piece, but we're also looking at hiring and getting some more information from a demographic standpoint, how that's broken out. And we continue to have discussions around strategy and how to prioritize our actions needed. So again, we know it's a big bulk of work. Ours is hiring, recruitment, retention, and professional development. Our focus has really been on the hiring component at this point, and that's not to say the other components are not important, but as a committee, we're focused on the recruitment piece. We don't have any proposed policy revisions that we have submitted at this time. The next steps and actions for us is to request data on retention rates for your Black, Indigenous, and people of color staff. We have received other data that we've been looking at. The retention piece is one that we'll go back and ask for that data and review that. We also, and by the time we submitted this, the September 22nd Board of Education meeting had occurred. From Policy 300, and I apologize, I didn't put what those policies are. Policy 300 is the personnel. Our subcommittee did put forward a public comment for that policy. And basically, we were glad to see that the policy committee reviewed it, that it was going to be at the discussion of the Board of Education meeting. We also, and I believe that the council had mentioned that the corresponding regulation 300-1, which is recruitment, selection, and employment of teacher personnel, that was being reviewed in tandem. I don't believe that was necessarily discussed at the Board of Education meeting, but we were happy to see that both of those pieces were being reviewed. And to add to the comments that Mr. Bass had made, it was really nice to hear from the Chief of Staff that policy revisions that have been brought forward from the Racial Equity Committee, that those comments are being looked at and taken very seriously, and where it made sense, these are my words, they're being considered and embedded in the drafts up for discussion. So those are that's the current policy of 300-1 that we've put forward at this point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a representative from the extracurricular activity subcommittee to give the update?
Yep, I'm the only one here, so. A summary.
Okay, sorry, just saw that Elisa's having some issues, so I'll just read through it. So the extracurricular activity subcommittee provided public comment at a Board of Education meeting regarding pre-game statement and racial slurs during the extracurricular activities. And that was, the public comment was given by Serena, so thank you for that. Comments were provided to the policy committee on policy 509, regarding the extracurricular and co-curricular activities. This committee also worked with the central office to advocate for revisions of the pre-game statement, and actually saw that in action at some football games this fall. So kudos to to that team for working on that. And they also provided additional comment about the discipline of students following racial slurs during extracurricular activities. Next steps for this committee, they're going to be continuing to advocate for revisions of policy 509, which is related to extracurricular and co-curricular activities, and as well as continue to review policies and advocate for equity regarding extracurricular and co-curricular activities. Thank you. Just in terms of next steps, I cannot remember what date our next committee of a whole meeting is. And I'm wondering if we're going to have to figure out a date, because I'm wondering if it's close to Thanksgiving. But Dawn, do you know what date we have on the books for the next meeting by any chance?
Let me see if I can pull it up. I am also having technical difficulties, so I'm now working on my Chromebook. So give me just a sec.
Okay, thank you, Mason. So it looks like our next meeting is November 17th. So we did make sure so it is scheduled fine. So our next committee meeting is November 17th. Avanya, I totally agree. And if folks in general are open to in person, we can definitely, and I'm happy to see that. As David said, he's can sort of like look into feasibility, and we can definitely get back to the committee regarding that for the next meeting. And then, as always, we definitely want our subcommittees to keep meeting. I will make sure to reach out to folks or just send out to everyone sort of who's on each committee and what the leads are to help facilitate communication. And then again, we're going to just continue to make sure we're streamlining the subcommittee process so that people feel comfortable with their charges and are getting the feedback they need and don't feel like they're kind of in a holding period. So we will definitely work on that. And so since our next meeting is on November 17th, any subcommittees that have updates will need their slides by November 3rd to make sure that we can get them on board docs on time. And then David, do you know off the top of your head the next Board of Education meetings or policy committee meetings?
Yes. So in October, Board of Ed will meet October 13th and October 27th. At this time, there's no policy committee scheduled for October, but Board of Ed, October 13th and October 27th.
Okay, that sounds good. And again, we'll try to continue to communicate, streamline the process if we hear of like certain policies or topics that are being discussed that are of interest of a community of our committee, making sure folks are aware that, so that if there is interest in making public comment, there is the time to do so. So I believe that is our last agenda item. So we have 4 minutes left. So if there's any questions or comments, please ask now, and then we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Any last questions or comments before we adjourn? Okay. Well, thank you guys for your time, and hopefully we might see each other in person in November, which would be really nice. So stay tuned regarding that, and have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.